Now, following the release of the Phala Phala report, President Cyril Ramaphosa looks set to fight calls for his resignation, despite a damning report that found he could have covered up the theft of money at his Phala Phala farm. Ramaphosa has confirmed that he will not resign and will stand for a second term as ANC President at the governing party's elective conference in 2 weeks. For more on this, we're joined in studio by Sam Mkokeli, lead partner at Public Affairs Consultancy, Mkokeli Advisory, and Professor Alex van der Heever, who's a governance expert, as well as Newzroom Afrika's business editor, Lucanyo Galato. Of course, very good afternoon to everybody. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. You come at a time where news has broken. Professor, the President will be challenging that report, taking it to the highest in terms of law, the Constitutional Court.
I think that that's the appropriate course of action. I think that there are credible instances of credible questions raised around the quality of the report itself, and that it is potentially reviewable. And I think that it's important not to jump the gun in terms of a process at this point because of the stakes. I mean, I think that the greatest concern that many people have is the succession. And I think that when we see the markets crash, it's because the fear of who might take over. And that is actually a very important question that we have to look at. What would stop in terms of policy if the President had to stand down? And what would take over as policy in relation to governance in South Africa? And I think that that is the concern, and I think that people have read it correctly. It is a high-risk moment in South Africa.
So I'm just looking at processes. It seems to be the operative words over the past 2 days. Now this move, what do you make of it?
It's a natural progression in this story. There's overwhelming body of argument that the report is flawed, but also tactically, Mr. Ramaphosa is taking the right action for his interests and for the ANC's interests. You're buying time. You've got key decisions that cannot be taken now. The NEC can't recall him based on a report that is hanging. Parliament would be silly to want to impeach him based on a report that is reviewable. Never mind the merits. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm reading what the fundis are writing out there. I mean, there's the issue of the Concord. And I'll be interested what the constitutional grounds would be when you're rushing to the Concord as you use the first court. I don't know if this is the next step, they're taking the right thing. But in terms of the tactics and the optics for the politics, they absolutely bang on strategy there. They're really kicking that can down the road. They're postponing the tsunami and everything else for a later stage.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there. Well, keep it on hold as the discussion does continue shortly after this. Don't go away. Right, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We do continue with our discussion in studio as we try and dissect some of the latest political developments. Of course, you'll know our breaking news that sources have confirmed that President Cyril Ramaphosa will be challenging the Phala Phala report at the Constitutional Court. I do continue, of course, in studio as we try and make sense of it. Lukhanyo, I know that you have been monitoring the story throughout the course of the week. And these latest developments, I mean, as we speak to the substance of this challenge, I mean, what have you found as we try and make sense of what legal footing or basis the President will be looking at here?
Right. Well, I mean, I wish that I could reveal our sources, but obviously we can't. But we spoke to them. we spoke to them like a few minutes ago. And basically they confirmed to us that, yes, indeed, the President is going, and he's going to go to the Constitutional Court as his first port of call. And he's arguing, obviously, the basis that some of, firstly, that his responses to the Phala Phala, to the independent panel, were not given enough consideration, which was something that his spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, had already alluded to when he gave a media briefing on Thursday. So the first is that, the President's responses weren't given consideration, and the fact that this panel, despite you confirming itself that there was a lot of hearsay information, still then reached these conclusions that he may have violated sections of the law and, of course, sections of the Constitution. So based on that basis, the President is then therefore challenging this report and probably will ask for the court to set it aside.
So as we speak, we know that the National Working Committee is meeting today. The meeting is underway. In fact, our reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo is there, who will be giving us an update shortly. But given the dynamics and at play, the content within the report and the factions at play, what could these discussions be looking like as we're sitting here and the discussions are happening in Nasrec, Johannesburg? Very
difficult to say, because you've got hard positions that are based on vested interests, potentially in operation. So some people, if we have a continuation of the current strategy of making the NPA, the Hawks, etc., independent and able to prosecute people, some of the people there are going to jail. And therefore they want to fight this as hard as possible, because it's really under the Ramaphosa government that they are under threat. His challenger, if we had to do a comparison, his challenger for president is deeply tainted with digital vibes. And that is a case which involved very serious allegations in a very substantial report that the SIU has produced, and which is still going to continue into potential prosecution. And that one is about the theft of state funds by a Minister of Health in the middle of a pandemic. Now, that is impeachable.
Professor, I'm going to have to ask you to hold your thought as we take our viewers to Nasrec, Johannesburg, where we find our reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo. Ziyanda, a lot has been happening in terms of breaking news. What's happening there?
Well, as you can see in our shot, you can see the coordinator in the Secretary General's office, Gwen Ramakgopa, with the Acting Secretary General, Paul Mashatile, as well as Gwede Mantashe, the chair of the National Chair, and of course they are here for that National Working Committee meeting. We're going to give you those visuals now of the National Working Committee. I'll ask my colleague Teho to pan for you. You can see Batavile Dlamini, Natim Tetwa there. You'll see Jeff Khadebe. There's also Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who's seated next to Dr. Naledi Pando. You'll also see Pemi Majodina, who will be critical for keeping that parliamentary caucus together. Should this matter, if a motion of no confidence is filed, Paul. So this is the status quo. You can also see Tony Yengeni out now. We're being asked to leave the room, but you can see that the 20-member NWC is here and they are deliberating over that Section 89 report. Just a short while ago outside, we saw, close allies of the president sort of having a caucus we saw Ronald Lamola standing with Fikile Mbalula alongside, Barbara Creasy, as well as Zizi Godwa, discussing presumably whatever was happening and taking place inside. So that's where we'll leave it for now, Mpho, as we're asked to exit the room where those NWC officials were actually sitting and meeting for this important gathering ahead of the NEC's meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. We now know, Mpho, that President Cyril Ramaphosa will be in attendance. He confirmed that to us earlier on, and he has been recused from this meeting.
Very well, Ziyanda Ngcobo, let's leave it there for now. Of course, giving us a glimpse of what is happening inside in terms of seating and who is there as we take stock of what the outcome could likely be. Of course, the discussion continues here in studio. Sam Mkokeli, lead partner at Public Affairs Consultancy, Mkokeli Advisory, and Professor Alex van den Heever, who's a governance expert as well as business, as well as politics editor, Lukhanya Galata, all at this round table. Of course, just listening to, getting an idea of who's inside and what's happening, I suppose we really would want to know, given the content of the report and the factions at play, the dynamics when it comes to important decisions that need to come out of there to influence or shape what might happen tomorrow, what are the probabilities looking like?
Look, there's a 73 chance that the report will say, the discussion will say through in favor of President Ramaphosa. There'll be a couple of people who will argue from the other camp. And historically, they haven't been great articulators of their positions. Tony Ngeni, the former health minister, Batabile Dlamini. Well, you can expect that there's going to be some hacking, but it's going to be managed. The NWC prepares for the NEC, and that's all they have to do. They're just going through the process. What is the problem in this discussion for those who want Mr. Ramaphosa to step aside or be recalled or whatever? They have a problem with the argument. The report is hanging. The court must take a decision on it. So any argument is pretty much academic. But the bigger issue is the NEC tomorrow. The NWC, you've got 25 people inside. Then tomorrow you've got the NEC, which has 86 members, and ex officio. So you've got 110 people potentially. The noise gets louder. And they have a culture and history of letting everybody speak, because they speak on consensus and they never vote. So that's going to be that long night and that we've become accustomed to during the Zuma years. But still, I mean, the Ramaphosa camp is okay with it. They'll take the pain.
Sam, I'm going to have to unfortunately ask you to hold your thought. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. I am still joined in studio by Sam Mkokeli, lead partner at Public Affairs Consultancy, Mkokeli Advisory, as well as Professor Alex van den Heever, who's a governance expert, as well as Lukhanya Galata, who is Newzroom Afrika's politics editor. Before we went to the break, Sam, you were talking about the probabilities and what's at stake within that NWC, factions at play. And what we heard from Pula Mabe just now, he says at the end of it all, one decision, one position will come out of that meeting.
Yeah, I mean, from a rational perspective, the argument sails through NWC, goes to the NEC, it goes to Parliament, and all the way that it certainly looks like it's winning. That's from the rational perspective. There's going to be the theatrics around it. There's 259 caucus members in the caucus out of 400 positions. In Parliament, it's an open vote, so it's hard for anyone to vote against as this should it come to that. So you expect the report to be rejected. That's from a rational perspective. But there's going to be the theatrics. There's going to be the EFF. There's going to be others in the opposition. There's going to be a lot of noise over the next a couple of days up until we get to the NASDAQ conference. I mean, Mr. Ramaphosa says he's standing for a second term. At the last conference of the ANC almost didn't close. It was so hard for them to on the last day when the buses are humming outside and people want to go home and they couldn't. So it's going to be chaotic.
Is that your expectation too? Do you expect the report to be rejected as the vote happens?
I would expect so with this trajectory. Some of the opposition parties, like the DA, have argued that Ramaphosa should resign, but we should have elections. but there's virtually no possibility that Parliament will vote for early elections. So the result that the DA would want out of that resignation would not happen, and the question is, how would they then vote and actually stay in the same position, although they're not sitting in national parliament? So those are some of the considerations, but I think that that's where we are at this point, and it would be hugely premature for a vote to go to proceed when the report is going to be taken on review. It's immensely premature, and a lot of information has been presented that the report is definitely reviewable.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, if I may ask the Prof, then why would the Democratic Alliance then come out and say, oh, well, we are going to invoke Section 50 and ask for the dissolution of Parliament? Is it, again, what Sam is talking about in terms of just political theatrics?
Well, I don't think that from their perspective it's theatrics. I think that's something that they would prefer. I think that at this point in time they would see advantage in an election. But the reality is that the ANC wouldn't vote for it. So it's not going to happen. So the question is whether that's being factored in to also how the DA would respond to the impeachment process. Because a resignation now of Ramaphosa would essentially put in position a faction that might make their position, improve their electoral position, but in 2024, not now. But a lot can happen between now and 2024. So the question is whether their calculation changes.
Yeah. Well, we heard ANC Chairperson Gwede Mantashe saying that he believes that if Ramaphosa does resign, it would be chaotic for the country and the ruling party. And for several years, I suppose it was assumed that one of the sources of Ramaphosa's apparent strength in the ANC is that there's no one else. I mean, how much has that changed over the cycle?
Look, the no one else argument is really a straw man's argument. Of course there's no one else, but you've got a problem with the guy you have currently. Is he going to be able to run all the way to the 2024 elections without being tripped by these issues? It's not about comparing Ramaphosa to Zweli Mkhize and all the false dichotomies. I mean, Alex was talking about the other section. I mean, that's fine. That's not the issue, but look beyond that. You've got one guy who has a problem. You re-elect him, the problems do not go away. It was the same thing with Jacob Zuma. They rammed him through, but the problem doesn't go away. We've got so many questions that we still have to find out about the forex aspect of the investigation against Mr. Ramaphosa. His affidavit now just signed off. It's an official statement under oath. Is so dodgy, and that problem is not going to go away. It's not a question of that there's nobody else. It's a question of, can this horse run the race?
Absolutely. We've also heard that should President Ramaphosa resign, in terms of economic policy, not much will change. That's according to Minister Enoch Godongwana, but also saying that he expects him to stay in his post, really emphasizing that on Friday.
Yeah, so the problem with the economic policy aspect is, will the leadership of Eskom be changed? Will the leadership of the NPA be changed? And that affects the economy because there's the possibility that state capture sort of 2.0 begins. And that has already devastated the South African economy. So macroeconomic policy, monetary policy, those kinds of economic policies probably won't change. But if Eskom goes into systemic decline further than what it is, and there's a serious concern that Eskom is actually being actively sabotaged at this point in order to undermine the Ramaphosa presidency. And that forms part of this strategy, which is very, very concerning. It shows the lengths, if that were true, it shows the lengths to which people are prepared to go to destabilize the South African economy. So I think we have a period now of uncertainty because of the factional politics within the ANC. And that factional politics is not about ideology.
Yeah.
It's not about policy. That's about access to the state resources. And that's what really should concern us. And the ANC, the sensible ones, in how they handle this process going forward, because it fundamentally affects the stability of South Africa.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Alex is 100% correct, but he stops short of dealing with the reality that we're dealing with. The economic policy is not going to change. Fine, Ramaphosa stays. How does the economic policy get implemented under these conditions? The analyst, economic analyst before this conversation was telling us about volatility. This volatility will actually affect interest rates, economic growth, and you have a likelihood of now getting a recession under Ramaphosa and Ramaphosa. So the problem is deeper than just whether it's when Ramaphosa goes and when Ramaphosa doesn't go. The issues concern Ramaphosa's own story, his version, and what South Africa is going to have to deal with. South Africa is going to have to deal with this question solely isolated from the rest of the conversations. The ANC factional politics is a problem, but we have to go further than that.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask both Sam and Professor? Sam, particularly, let me start with you. There is a saying, I mean, in isiXhosa that, I'm going to translate it, but when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. So in this instance, we are seeing factions within the African National Congress having a right royal go at each other, and it is South Africa that seems to be suffering. What do we then do as a country? How do we move? Can we move forward with the ANC as the governing organization?
No, the ANC has lost all the pretenses and all the potential to govern South Africa on its own in 2024. That's the reality. South Africans need to take off the rose-tinted glasses and see the reality. Never mind our hearts and our wishes and around the ANC and what's going to happen. It has a potential, a potentially impeachable president. Whether or not technically right now the man is going to survive in court, but the problems are there. So we have volatility. That's the reality. We're deep, we're in trouble. Avoiding dealing with it and hoping that the Messiah will come from the ANC is fooling ourselves. We've started to look around for new politics, new kind of leadership. The ANC is not capable of finding somebody better than Cyril Ramaphosa. He is the worst. He is the best of a worst bunch of leaders.
Prof, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, so I'm not disagreeing with that analysis. So the first issue is, where does the volatility come from in this current struggle? The volatility is the risk that the person who takes over has more skeletons in his closet than the president has, and that will cause massive instability, because essentially that's also not going to go away. But the further issue, which is absolutely correct, is theoretically if the president had to step down, we should go into elections, because nobody who takes over has any mandate. And but the problem is
that's not true, Alex. That's not true. It's not true. Presidents are elected by Parliament, as we have currently.
No, we have.
So, yes, and we've been through that. So the president never draws the mandate from the public. We don't have the presidential election in South Africa.
Absolutely, in that direct sense. But in an indirect sense, a large part, and this is confirmed by many of the polls, that the ANC's positive results in the last general election came because of Ramaphosa. And anybody else leading the party could have taken the ANC below 50%. So to that extent, the mandate is very much around Ramaphosa. And now the mandate, if you look at the current polls, it's not going to be around the others. But the issue of the true mandate, and the mandate under which he was elected, was to also reform government and to deal with the state capture project. The state capture project might be reinstated if he's removed. That wasn't what people voted for. So it's absolutely critical.
Sam, but she's chairing.
I was chairing.
You're right. You're right, but
thank you.
But it looks like as things get heated, we have run out of time, and we're going to have to leave it there for now. And thanking you, gentlemen, for coming in studio. Right at boiling point, Sam Mkokeli, lead partner at Public Affairs and Consultancy, Mkokeli Advisory, as well as Professor Alex van der Heever, who's a governance expert, and of course, Newzroom Afrika's politics editor, Lukhanyo Kalato.